At 9:47 on a Tuesday morning in March, in Courtroom 6 of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia, the Honorable Judge Margaret Thornton leaned forward over her elevated mahogany bench, pointed one manicured finger directly at the chest of a man standing alone at the respondent's table, and said the word that would end her career. Fraud. She said it the way someone says a name they have been waiting a long time to say, slowly, deliberately, with visible satisfaction, as though the word itself were a verdict she had already decided before anyone had presented a single document. The courtroom held 41 people that morning. 2 attorneys from federal oversight agencies occupied the first row. A court stenographer's hands went momentarily still over her keys before resuming. 2 marshals stationed near the side door exchanged a glance that lasted exactly 1 second too long. And in the gallery, a woman from the Richmond Times-Dispatch opened a fresh page in her notebook and underlined the date twice. The man she accused stood in a gray suit that was 7 years old. The cuffs had been rehemmed twice by hand. His hands rested flat on the table in front of him, palms down, fingers still, the way a person holds themselves when they have learned that stillness is not weakness but discipline. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He looked at the judge the way a person looks at whether they have no power to stop, with the patience of someone who understands that storms, regardless of their fury, do not last forever. His name was Daniel Morrow. He was 43 years old. He was a single father raising a 9-year-old daughter on a consultant's salary in a 3rd-floor apartment with a broken elevator. And the fraud Judge Thornton was accusing him of in open court on the record in front of 41 witnesses did not exist. What Judge Thornton did not know, what she could not have known, because she had never looked closely enough at the man standing before her, was that Daniel Morrow had spent 11 years as a forensic auditor for the Department of Defense. She did not know that the document she was waving from the bench, the one she called fabricated, had been authenticated by 3 independent agencies before it ever reached her courtroom. And she did not know that one of those agencies had already begun a quiet investigation. Not into Daniel Morrow, into her. Keep watching. Because what happened over the next 30 days did not simply vindicate a falsely accused single father. It dismantled a federal judge in the same courtroom where she had tried to destroy him, and he never raised his voice once. 6 months before that Tuesday morning in Courtroom 6, Daniel Morrow lived a life that most people would have called small. He would not have argued with them. He woke every morning at 5:15 in a rented 2-bedroom apartment on Chamberlain Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. The building was 60 years old and carried its age without apology. The hallway carpet smelled like industrial cleaning solution and time. His apartment sat on the 3rd floor, and the elevator had not functioned since before he moved in. He took the stairs without thinking about it, the way people absorb burdens they have carried long enough that the weight becomes invisible. His kitchen had one window that faced east. The morning light came in cold and gray. Landing on a countertop, he had resurfaced himself using leftover laminate from a job site 2 years prior. The coffee maker was a $12 drip machine purchased from a discount store on Route 1. It made weak, bitter coffee. He drank it every morning without complaint, standing at the counter in the quiet before the rest of the building woke up, because those 15 minutes of cold gray silence were the only part of the day that belonged entirely to him. Daniel earned $41,000 a year working as an independent compliance consultant. He reviewed financial records for small businesses and nonprofit organizations, identified irregularities, and produced written reports that his clients frequently filed without fully reading. The work was methodical and unglamorous, and he was exceptionally good at it, in the way that people are good at things they do not need to love in order to take seriously. Before that, he had spent over a decade inside the federal auditing system, a career that ended not because of failure but because of a single choice made on a single afternoon in a supervisor's office at the Pentagon. His wife, Claire, had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer when their daughter was 18 months old. The diagnosis came late. She was gone in 11 weeks. The timeline still did not feel real to him even now. 11 weeks between the word cancer and the word gone. He had taken emergency leave, then extended leave, and then he had walked into his supervisor's office and said 5 words. "I need to go home." He never went back. He built a smaller life around the only person who still needed him to show up. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old and she had her mother's habit of tilting her head slightly to the left when she was paying close attention, which was almost always. Every afternoon at 3:20, Daniel parked his 12-year-old Honda Civic in the pickup lane at Westover Elementary and waited. He was never late. Lily came through the double doors with her backpack hanging from one shoulder, always the left shoulder, and she would scan the row of waiting cars until she found his. She never waved. She simply walked toward him with the quiet certainty of someone who has never had reason to doubt that he would be there. They had a routine. She sat at the kitchen table with her homework while he made dinner. She kept her pencils sharp and her erasers clean. He liked watching her work without her knowing he was watching. The way her handwriting slowed when she was thinking hard. The way she mouthed words silently when she read. Some evenings she read aloud to him from whatever her class was studying, her voice careful and unhurried, and he would sit across from her with both hands around his coffee mug and understand, in those moments, that this was exactly what he had traded a federal career for. He never regretted it. Not once. The case that placed him in front of Judge Margaret Thornton began as something completely unremarkable. A nonprofit called the Shenandoah Valley Veterans Housing Initiative had contracted Daniel to conduct an independent audit before a scheduled federal review. He found what he typically found in organizations run by well-intentioned people with limited administrative resources: misclassified expenses, receipts filed in the wrong quarter, minor reconciliation errors. He corrected them, documented everything, and wrote his report. What he had not expected was what the numbers revealed underneath those surface errors. A pattern of fund redirection that corresponded to no approved budget line. Nearly $400,000 over 3 fiscal years, routed through a vendor whose name appeared on no state or federal business registry. Daniel flagged it. He documented it thoroughly. He reported it to the appropriate federal oversight body through the correct formal channels. That report, through a chain of bureaucratic routing he did not fully understand at the time, landed on the desk of Judge Margaret Thornton. 22 days remained before the case would return to court. He did not know that yet. He only knew the morning. He only knew the stairs, the coffee, the cold gray light, and the sound of Lily's alarm going off at 7 in the room down the hall. Judge Margaret Thornton was 56 years old and had occupied the federal bench for 14 years. She was known throughout the Eastern District for 2 qualities that attorneys discussed in the same breath: her precision and her intolerance. Lawyers who appeared before her prepared with the kind of obsessive thoroughness usually reserved for board examinations, not because they admired her but because they had watched what happened to those who did not. She was tall, angular, and carried herself with the specific confidence of someone who had spent over a decade in a room where everyone else stood when she entered. She spoke in complete, layered paragraphs, rarely repeating herself, and she had a habit of removing her reading glasses and holding them loosely in one hand while delivering a ruling, as though the glasses were a prop in a performance that only she had rehearsed and only she fully understood. What Daniel's audit had inadvertently uncovered was a financial thread that ran, through 3 layers of shell entities, to a place Judge Thornton had spent considerable energy ensuring no one would ever look. The phantom vendor, the non-existent company through which $400,000 had been quietly redirected, was registered to a holding company controlled by a consulting firm. That consulting firm belonged to a man named Gerald Lester. Gerald Lester had served, for 6 years, as Judge Thornton's senior clerk. He now ran a government affairs consultancy in Alexandria whose primary clients included, until recently, several federally funded veterans nonprofits, including the one Daniel had just audited. Daniel did not know any of this when he filed his report. He had simply followed the numbers to where they led, the way he had always done, the way 11 years of federal auditing had trained him to do. He did not know that by doing his job correctly, he had accidentally stepped into the center of something that a sitting federal judge needed to keep buried. What he knew was that the numbers did not lie, and he had reported them. 2 weeks after his report was filed with the federal oversight body, Daniel received a subpoena delivered to his consulting address on a Wednesday afternoon. Not as a witness, as a respondent. The United States Attorney's Office, acting on a referral generated through Thornton's court, had opened a preliminary inquiry into whether Daniel Morrow had fabricated audit findings in order to defraud a federally funded nonprofit organization. The accusation was without foundation. It was also devastating. His consulting license was suspended pending review within 72 hours of the subpoena. His 7 active clients were each contacted individually by federal investigators over the following week. Within 10 days, 5 of them had terminated their contracts without explanation, their emails polite and brief in the specific way that emails written by people who have been frightened by lawyers tend to be. His monthly income dropped from $3,400 to $800. He sat at his kitchen table one evening and opened a spreadsheet on his laptop and looked at the numbers the way a doctor looks at a scan that confirms what they have been dreading. Lily came out of her bedroom that night carrying a library book. She sat across from him at the table and opened it without a word. She did not ask what was on his screen. She did not ask why his coffee had gone cold in the mug beside his hand. She simply read, quietly, in the chair she always used, and her presence in the room was the only thing that felt entirely stable. He closed the laptop. He watched her read. He said nothing. The preliminary hearing was scheduled 3 weeks after the subpoena. Daniel appeared without an attorney because he could not afford one, and the legal aid office nearest to him had a 6-week waiting list. He carried a manila folder containing every document he had generated during the audit, time-stamped emails, vendor verification requests that had gone unanswered, bank reconciliation reports cross-referenced against 3 independent data sources. Judge Thornton presided. She should not have. The conflict of interest was severe, and it was undisclosed, and every attorney in the room that day who later learned the full truth would say the same thing, that someone should have caught it sooner. But no one in courtroom 6 that morning knew what Daniel's audit had actually uncovered. To the people in that room, this was a routine inquiry. A small-time consultant accused of inflating findings, perhaps for professional attention, perhaps for reasons no one had fully articulated yet. Thornton looked at Daniel the way a person looks at something they have already categorized and moved past. She removed her glasses. She held them in her left hand. "Mr. Morrow," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room with the effortlessness of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I want to be unambiguous about what this court is confronting. We are not here to validate the creative conclusions of a man who appears to believe that filing a sensational audit report constitutes professional achievement. The findings you submitted are, in my preliminary assessment, not only inaccurate but deliberately fabricated. This court will treat them accordingly. I intend to refer this matter for criminal prosecution, and I intend to do so before the end of this week." Daniel stood still. His hands were at his sides. He looked at her directly. "The documents speak for themselves, Your Honor." 8 words. The courtroom was quiet. A marshal near the door shifted his weight. The stenographer resumed typing. In the gallery, a woman named Dr. Renata Solis sat in the 4th row. She was a forensic accountant attached to the Government Accountability Office, assigned to observe the hearing as part of a separate review of veterans' nonprofit funding streams. She had not expected anything unusual. She had not expected to watch a federal judge issue a preliminary fraud finding from the bench without permitting the respondent to introduce a single piece of documentary evidence. She opened her notebook. She wrote one line. It read, "Procedural concern. Premature bench finding. No evidentiary review conducted." She underlined it. Then she drew a box around it. That afternoon, Daniel picked up Lily from aftercare at 4:15. She climbed into the passenger seat and buckled her belt. "How was your day?" he asked, pulling into traffic on Broad Street. "Good," she said. "We learned about tectonic plates." He glanced at her. "What do they do?" "They move really slowly," she said, looking out the window. "But when they push against each other hard enough for long enough, everything shakes." He looked at her in the rearview mirror for a moment. She was watching the street go by with her head tilted to the left. "That sounds about right," he said quietly. He made rice and black beans for dinner. Lily set the table with the deliberate care she brought to everything. They ate in the kind of silence that is not empty but full, the silence of 2 people who understand each other well enough not to need to fill every moment with words. After she went to bed, he sat on the couch in the dark living room. The streetlight outside pressed a stripe of cold light across the floor. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and thought about the word Thornton had used. Fraud. Said in open court. Said in front of 41 people. recorded by a stenographer, filed in a public docket accessible to anyone with a federal court login. Said about him, he sat there until 11:45. Then he walked to the kitchen, rinsed his mug, turned off the light and went to bed. 8 days had passed since the subpoena. 22 remained. The days that followed were the kind that do not arrive with obvious cruelty but deliver it in careful, measured layers, each one slightly heavier than the last, applied with the patience of a process that does not need to hurry because it believes it has already won. On a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the preliminary hearing, Daniel found a notice slipped under his apartment door. It was printed on plain white paper with a property management logo at the top. 30 days to vacate. The stated reason was non-payment. He was 13 days late on the current month and had been 9 days late the month before. The notice was the most impersonal document he had ever held, and it carried the specific power of documents that do not need to be personal to be effective. He stood in the kitchen and read it twice. The cold gray morning light came through the east window and landed on the laminate countertop, which had begun to curl at one corner where moisture had worked its way underneath. He folded the notice in half and placed it in the kitchen drawer beneath the takeout menus they never used. He did not tell Lily. She did not need to know that the floor beneath her was shifting. She was 9 years old and she trusted that the ground would hold, and he intended to ensure that it did, even if he had to hold it up himself. For days after the eviction notice, a letter arrived from the United States Attorney's Office. It informed him that a formal preliminary investigation had been opened into potential wire fraud and material misrepresentation in connection with his audit of the Shenandoah Valley Veterans Housing Initiative. The potential penalty, if charges were filed and a conviction obtained, was listed in the letter with the clinical neutrality of legal language that has learned not to acknowledge the human weight it carries. Up to 20 years in federal prison. He read that line 3 times. He thought about what 20 years meant in the specific language of Lily's life. She would be 29. She would have graduated from college. She might have started a career, a life, relationships he would know nothing about. He would have missed every morning at the kitchen table, every afternoon pickup at Westover Elementary, every evening of her reading aloud to him from a library book while her food went cold and her pencils stayed sharp. All of it, gone. Because he had followed the numbers to where they led and reported what he found, the way his training and his conscience had always told him to do. He sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of him for a long time. The clock on the microwave read 10:42. Outside, a city bus groaned past on Chamberlain Avenue. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The ordinary sounds of a world that had not noticed what was happening to him moved through the walls and meant nothing. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel opened his laptop at the kitchen table. The screen cast pale blue light across his face, catching the lines around his eyes that had deepened noticeably over the past several weeks. He opened a blank email. In the address field, he typed the submission's address for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. In the subject line, he typed 4 words, judicial financial misconduct evidence. He had the documents. He had the complete vendor trail. He had the documented connection between Gerald Lester's consulting firm and the phantom invoices that ran through the nonprofit's books. He had the corporate filing records that linked Lester's firm to Thornton's former chambers. He had enough to hand any investigative journalist a career-defining story. 1 email, 1 attachment, and the truth would leave his hands and enter the public record in a way that even a sitting federal judge could not contain. He stared at the cursor blinking in the body of the email for 13 minutes. The microwave clock moved from 10:42 to 10:55. He thought about Lily in the next room. He thought about the way she arranged her stuffed animals along the wall in the same order every night, bear, rabbit, owl, and how she would notice immediately and quietly if any of them were disturbed. He thought about the kind of man he wanted her to remember when she was old enough to understand what this period of their lives had actually been. He thought about the difference between releasing the truth and weaponizing it, and whether the line between those two things was drawn by the act itself or by the motive behind it. He deleted the email address from the address field. He closed the laptop. He sat with his hands flat on the table in the dark, in the same posture he had held in the courtroom. Palms down, fingers still, a man choosing restraint not because he lacked the means to fight but because he understood that the truth, handled with patience, does not need him to throw it like a weapon. It only needs him to protect it long enough for it to move on its own. 14 days remained. 3 days after that night, Lily came home from school and found him sitting on the couch at 3:45 in the afternoon. He was never on the couch at 3:45. He was always in the kitchen. She set her backpack by the door. She walked across the room. She sat down beside him without speaking. She did not look at his face or ask what was wrong or offer any of the careful, well-meaning questions that adults use to approach each other's pain. She leaned her shoulder against his arm. They sat like that while the afternoon light moved slowly across the floor and faded behind the building across the street. He put his hand on top of her head. She did not move. The room was quiet and still and full of the kind of presence that does not require words because it is already saying the only thing that matters. That was all. That was enough. What Daniel did not know, could not have known, sitting in that quiet apartment on Chamberlain Avenue, was that Dr. Renata Solis had not been able to set down what she had witnessed in courtroom 6. The line she had written and boxed in her notebook had followed her back to her office at the Government Accountability Office and refused to behave like a minor procedural footnote. It had grown. It had expanded into a question. And the question had led her, through official document requests and interagency records access, to Daniel's original audit report. She read it in full. It was thorough, methodical, and entirely consistent with established forensic accounting standards. Every finding was supported by documentary evidence. Every irregularity was traceable to a specific transaction with a specific date. The report of a falsely accused man who had simply done his job with precision and reported what the numbers told him. She kept reading. She pulled the corporate filings for the phantom vendor. She cross-referenced them with the registered agents for Lester's consulting firm. She requested the judicial assignment records for the preliminary hearing. She documented, over 11 working days, the complete chain of events that connected a sitting federal judge to the financial irregularities that a single father's audit had accidentally exposed. On a Friday afternoon, with 11 days remaining before the case returned to court, Dr. Renata Solis filed a 47-page findings report with the Office of the Inspector General. She attached every document. She included a formal procedural complaint regarding the conduct of the preliminary hearing. She did not contact Daniel. She did not know his phone number or his address or anything about his life beyond what she had observed in a courtroom. A man in a re-hemmed gray suit who stood still while a judge tried to break him. She acted because the record demanded it. The same reason he had reported the audit in the first place. 8 days remained. 30 days after Judge Margaret Thornton accused Daniel Morrow of fraud in open court, the case returned to courtroom 6. This time, it was not Daniel who was under examination. The morning was cold. A late spring frost had settled over Richmond overnight, and the courthouse steps were glazed with a thin sheet of ice that caught the gray morning light and held it flat and colorless. Daniel walked up those steps at 8:32, wearing the same gray suit. He had pressed it the previous evening with a dry iron and a damp cloth, working the wrinkles out of the lapels with the same patience he brought to everything that mattered and could not be rushed. Inside courtroom 6, the gallery was full in a way it had not been 30 days earlier. Not 41 people this time, over 70. The Richmond Times-Dispatch reporter was back in the same seat, notebook open, pen already moving. 3 attorneys from the Department of Justice occupied the front row. Their briefcases aligned with the kind of uniformity that signals institutional seriousness. 2 investigators from the Office of the Inspector General sat directly behind them, their identification badges visible on lanyards. And in the 4th row, Dr. Renata Solis sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the room with the focused calm of someone who has done what needed to be done and is now present only to witness its effect. Judge Thornton was not on the bench. She could not be. A senior judge from the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals, the Honorable William Carey, had been assigned to the proceeding following the Inspector General's report. He was 71 years old, with white hair, a measured voice that carried without effort, and the specific quality of authority that comes not from a title but from decades of knowing the difference between the law and the convenience of the law. He did not remove his glasses for effect. He did not perform. He opened the record and he read. He read for 44 minutes. He read the Inspector General's findings, which documented that Judge Thornton had presided over a matter in which she held an undisclosed material conflict of interest. He read the financial trail that Daniel's audit had uncovered, the phantom vendor, the shell entities, the $400,000 redirected over 3 fiscal years through Gerald Lester's consulting firm. He read the procedural analysis submitted by Dr. Solis, which documented that the preliminary fraud finding had been issued from the bench without an evidentiary hearing, in direct violation of established federal judicial conduct standards. And he read the conclusion, stated plainly, without equivocation, that the criminal referral filed against Daniel Morrow had been generated not on evidentiary grounds, but as a retaliatory mechanism designed to discredit the forensic auditor whose accurate findings threatened to expose judicial misconduct at the federal level. The courtroom was completely still. Gerald Lester was absent. He had retained counsel and declined to appear, citing his Fifth Amendment protections. His absence communicated more than his presence could have managed. Judge Thornton sat in the gallery, not on the bench. In the gallery, 3rd row, left side, 2 seats from the aisle. She wore a dark navy suit and the expression of a person who has made the decision to reveal nothing. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her jaw was set. She looked smaller than Daniel remembered, as though the bench had been the primary source of her dimensions, and without it she was simply a woman sitting in a room full of people who now possessed the complete picture she had worked to keep fragmented. Judge Carey looked up from the record. He turned toward the respondent's table, where Daniel stood, alone. No attorney. The manila folder in front of him, considerably thicker than it had been 30 days ago. "Mr. Morrow," Judge Carey said, his voice settling into every corner of the room. "This court finds that the fraud allegations brought against you were without merit, without evidentiary foundation, and were referred to the United States Attorney's Office in direct violation of established judicial conduct standards. The criminal referral is hereby vacated in its entirety. The preliminary finding issued in this courtroom 30 days ago is stricken from the public record. Your professional standing is ordered restored effective immediately. And this court formally acknowledges, on the record, the integrity, accuracy, and professional competence of your audit findings." Daniel stood still. His hands were flat on the table. He nodded, a single, small movement that only those close enough to him could see. In the gallery, the Times-Dispatch reporter was writing without pausing. Dr. Solis exhaled slowly through her nose, the only visible sign that she had been carrying a weight she had not acknowledged until this moment permitted her to set it down. One of the DOJ attorneys leaned slightly toward his colleague and said something quiet. The colleague shook his head with the measured deliberateness of someone watching a thing they had suspected but hoped they were wrong about. Judge Carey was not finished. "Furthermore," he said, "this court refers the conduct of Judge Margaret Thornton to the Judicial Council of the Fourth Circuit for formal review proceedings under the applicable provisions of federal judicial conduct statute. The documented evidence before this court indicates a pattern of conduct that is fundamentally incompatible with the responsibilities of a federal judicial officer." The room absorbed this without sound. Thornton did not move. Her eyes traveled once, briefly, in Daniel's direction and then away, the involuntary glance of someone checking the face of the person they underestimated, and finding in it nothing that gives them comfort. Daniel did not look at her. He did not need to. There was nothing in her direction that required his attention now. He turned from the table and walked toward the gallery, where a small figure sat in the last row beside a neighbor who had agreed to drive her. Lily was wearing her school uniform, the navy cardigan, the white collar, her hair in a neat ponytail. Her backpack rested on the seat beside her. She watched her father walk the length of the courtroom toward her with her head tilted slightly to the left, the way it always tilted when she was listening carefully to something important happening around her. He reached her. He stopped. She stood up without being asked. She did not say anything. She took his hand, and they walked out of courtroom 6 together, through the heavy double doors, down the marble corridor, and out through the main entrance into the cold morning air that smelled like frost and old stone and the particular clarity that follows the end of something that should never have begun. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, she looked up at him. "Is it over?" she asked. He looked down at her. He squeezed her hand once. "Yeah," he said. "It's over." She nodded. She did not smile and she did not need to. She simply fell into step beside him as they walked toward the car, her backpack shifting gently against her hip, her hand warm and certain inside his, the way it had always been and the way he had made sure, through 30 days of the hardest kind of stillness, it would continue to be. 5 months after the ruling in Courtroom 6, Judge Margaret Thornton submitted her resignation from the federal bench. The Judicial Council's formal review had concluded with a recommendation for removal proceedings, a process she preempted by resigning on a Monday morning in late August. Her letter to the Chief Judge of the Fourth Circuit was 2 paragraphs long. It cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities. No one who read it believed either stated reason. The resignation was accepted without ceremony. Gerald Lester was indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of misappropriation of federally designated funds. His trial was scheduled for the following spring. He retained 2 attorneys from a firm in Washington. The $400,000 redirected through his consulting company was traced, recovered, and returned to the veterans' housing programs it had been allocated to fund. Daniel Morrow's consulting license was reinstated within 45 days of Judge Carey's ruling. By the end of the 3rd month, he had 14 active clients. The Department of Veterans Affairs contacted him directly with an offer to serve as an independent auditor for a portfolio of 3 Mid-Atlantic nonprofits under federal funding review. The contract paid $92,000 annually, more than twice what he had earned in any previous year. He moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in a quieter neighborhood near the river. Lily got her own room with a west-facing window. Every evening the light came in warm and long, falling across the desk where she did her homework with her pencils sharp and her erasers clean and her library books stacked in the order she intended to read them. One evening she looked up from her reading and said, "Dad, why didn't you get mad at the judge? She said really bad things about you in front of everybody." He set his coffee down. He looked at her across the table. "Because getting loud is easy," he said. "Staying quiet when you know the truth. That's the hard part. And the hard part is almost always the right part." She held that thought. She tilted her head to the left. Then she went back to her book. He watched her read, and for the first time in a very long time the weight he had been carrying felt like something he had set down without noticing the exact moment it left his hands. The truth had not needed his anger. It had only ever needed his patience. Watch until the end of every story on this channel, because in this one, a single father who was falsely accused of fraud by a federal judge walked out of that same courtroom 30 days later with his name cleared, his career restored, a judge's resignation filed, and his daughter's hand in his.